If you've been feeling guilty for changing while people around you stay the same, this is for you. There is a quiet kind of guilt that doesn't come from doing something wrong, but from becoming someone different. It appears when growth creates distance, when familiar voices feel softer, when shared worlds no longer fit the same way. Outgrowing others is rarely loud. It happens slowly, in pauses, in moments where laughter doesn't land the same, in conversations that end earlier than they used to. And yet, instead of relief, something heavy follows. A feeling that whispers, "Why do you feel lighter without them?" A sense that moving forward means betraying the past. This guilt is not about ego or superiority. It is about attachment, memory, loyalty to who you once were, and to those who knew that version of you best. Growth changes shape, and not everyone can change with it. Distance rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as small moments that feel slightly off. Conversations that once flowed now pause. Laughter still happens, but it doesn't linger. There is no argument, no clear rupture, just a subtle sense that something has shifted. At first, it feels temporary, a phase, fatigue, life being busy. The mind looks for explanations that preserve familiarity, because accepting distance means accepting change, and change feels disloyal to shared history. Outgrowing someone does not begin with rejection. It begins with awareness, an awareness that certain topics no longer resonate, that silence feels more peaceful than forced connection, that being alone feels more honest than being understood halfway. These realizations often bring confusion, not clarity. There is affection without alignment, care without closeness, and beneath it all, a quiet discomfort emerges. Not because the other person has done something wrong, but because growth has created a space that did not exist before. This is the earliest stage of emotional separation, where nothing has ended, yet nothing feels the same. The heart notices before the mind can explain, and instead of relief, the first emotion that surfaces is often guilt, soft, unnamed, and heavy. A guilt born not from harm, but from change. Guilt does not appear randomly. It grows from attachment, from history, from the invisible agreements formed long before anyone had the words to name them. Most connections begin with sameness, shared struggles, shared seasons, a feeling of we are in this together. Over time, that sameness becomes safety, and safety becomes identity. Who someone is starts to feel inseparable from who they were with. So when growth introduces difference, the nervous system reacts, not with logic, but with alarm. The guilt of outgrowing others is often rooted in early emotional learning. Many were taught, quietly or explicitly, that closeness equals goodness, that staying is virtuous, that leaving, emotionally or physically, means abandonment, even if no harm was intended. Memory plays its part. The mind replays moments of loyalty, laughter, survival. It asks whether growth invalidates the past, whether becoming someone new erases the version that was once needed by others. This guilt is not about superiority. It is about loyalty to shared meaning. There is also fear beneath it. Fear of being seen as ungrateful, fear of being misunderstood, fear that choosing alignment means choosing loss. And so guilt forms as a protective emotion, a way to keep bonds intact, even when they no longer fit. Not because growth is wrong, but because separation has always been framed as something that is. Human beings are not static. The mind, like the body, continues to change in response to experience, environment, and reflection. Psychological growth is not a decision. It is a process that unfolds quietly over time. As people mature, their inner frameworks shift, values reorganize, emotional thresholds change. What once felt meaningful may begin to feel neutral. What once felt tolerable may start to feel heavy. This is not rejection of others, but refinement of the self. Growth often happens unevenly. Two people can share the same beginning and still develop in different directions. One may grow through introspection, another through routine. One may question inherited beliefs, while another finds comfort in preserving them. Neither path is superior. They are simply different responses to life. From a psychological perspective, this divergence is natural. Identity formation is ongoing. The brain continuously integrates new information, reshaping priorities and emotional need. As this happens, alignment with certain relationships can weaken, not because of conflict, but because internal resonance changes. The discomfort comes when emotional bonds lag behind psychological evolution. The attachment remains, but the internal self has moved. This creates tension. The nervous system senses misalignment, even when affection still exists, and the mind struggles to reconcile care with distance. Outgrowing others is not a moral event. It is a developmental one, a quiet sign that the inner world has reorganized, asking for relationships that reflect who someone has become, not who they once were. This is where the conflict sharpens, where awareness turns into tension. On one side lies loyalty, to shared history, to emotional promises that were never spoken but deeply felt. Loyalty says, stay the same. Don't cause pain. Don't be the one who changes. It carries the weight of memory, of who was there during earlier versions of life. On the other side lives truth, a quieter voice, one that notices exhaustion after conversations, one that recognizes the subtle shrinking of the self in order to maintain harmony. Truth does not accuse, it simply observes. Many try to resolve this conflict by choosing loyalty alone. They remain present but disconnected. They listen without being heard. They edit themselves carefully, hoping the discomfort will fade. Over time, this creates an internal fracture. Not dramatic, but draining. Resistance often shows up as self-doubt. Am I being selfish? Am I overthinking? Shouldn't love be enough? These questions keep the person suspended between who they are becoming and who they are expected to remain. The cost of this suspension is rarely visible to others, but internally it accumulates as quiet resentment, emotional fatigue, and a growing sense of invisibility. Truth does not demand abandonment. It asks for honesty, first inward, then outward. And this is where guilt intensifies, because choosing truth can feel like choosing loss. Yet what often goes unnamed is this: staying disconnected is also a loss, just one that happens slowly, from the inside out. The realization does not arrive all at once. It forms gradually, like clarity after a long emotional fog. There comes a moment when guilt is no longer the loudest feeling, when it is joined by something steadier, understanding, a quiet recognition that discomfort has been signaling something true, not something wrong, that the unease was never asking for self-punishment, only attention. This is when the narrative begins to shift. Growth is no longer framed as betrayal, but as movement. Distance is no longer seen as cruelty, but as consequence. The mind starts to recognize that not every ending is an act of harm, and not every continuation is an act of love. In this moment, grief often surfaces, not just for the relationship, but for the version of the self that existed within it. There is mourning for shared language, shared timing, shared emotional ground. Letting go means accepting that something meaningful belonged to a past season. What softens the guilt is this realization. Love does not disappear simply because proximity changes. Meaning is not erased because alignment fades. What was real remains real, without needing to be preserved unchanged. This is not resolution. It is clarity, a turning point where the inner world stops fighting itself, where growth and care are no longer positioned as opposite. And in that space, something settles. Not relief, but peace. The understanding that becoming more honest is not the same as becoming less kind. After realization comes integration. Not dramatic change, but a quieter emotional rearrangement. Growth and grief begin to coexist in the same inner space. There is still affection, still memory, still a soft tenderness toward what once was. But there is also acceptance that closeness cannot always be preserved without distortion. The heart learns to hold both without forcing a choice between them. This stage is not about cutting ties. It is about loosening emotional obligations that were never consciously chosen. The mind slowly understands that gratitude does not require permanence, and care does not demand self-erasure. There is a subtle shift in how relationships are felt. Instead of asking, "How do I stay?" the question becomes, "How do I remain honest without becoming cold?" Emotional maturity emerges not as detachment, but as clarity with compassion. In this integration, guilt begins to transform. It loses its sharpness and becomes something gentler, like sadness without accusation. The person no longer sees growth as a threat to loyalty, but as a natural continuation of inner life. What remains is a quieter form of connection. Love without pressure, memory without obligation, presence without performance. This is where healing truly begins, not through dramatic closure, but through subtle emotional alignment. The self no longer feels split between past and present. It begins to feel whole again, without needing to return to who it once was. In the end, growth does not ask for permission. It unfolds quietly, like a season changing without announcement. One day, the air simply feels different, lighter, more honest. Outgrowing others is not a declaration. It is an acceptance, an understanding that life moves in rhythms, not contract, that some connections are meant to shape a chapter, not the entire story. Their purpose was never permanence. It was presence at a specific moment in time. Here, there is no need to justify distance, no need to explain evolution. The self no longer measures worth by how much it can carry, or how long it can remain unchanged for the comfort of others. What remains is gratitude without guilt, respect without proximity, love that does not demand self-betrayal to prove its sincerity. Becoming without apology does not mean becoming alone. It means becoming aligned, with values that feel true, with conversations that nourish rather than drain, with a life that reflects the inner world as it is now, not as it once was. There is a quiet dignity in this stage, a softness that comes from no longer resisting what is natural. Growth does not erase connection. It simply places it where it belongs, in memory, in meaning, and in the past that made becoming possible. And in that acceptance, the guilt finally loosens its grip, not because it was wrong to feel it, but because it is no longer needed.